Hello, everyone. Welcome to this short webcast on storytelling for leaders who care. I am Rohan, and I'm joining you from Mumbai. It's been raining here quite a few days now, and hope the rains will subside. Nonetheless, it's a fine Friday evening. I want to thank you all for making time on this Friday evening, joining here, whereas you could have been doing something else. But thank you for making time. We will be covering our subject matter in around 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll leave 10 minutes for Q&A. We have some questions that we received during the registrations, but we would also love to take questions from you, the audience. So at any given point in time, you have a question about what we are talking or something that you want to suggest, please use the chat box and we can take it up from there. So let's just dive in. So this is today's agenda. Uh, we will tell you about why story leaders really need storytelling. Why they need it? We'll also share with you some examples of some famous leaders who have used stories that have gone popular, and we will direct you towards three areas that we feel any leader worth his salt should be focusing on as far as storytelling is concerned. Post this, we want to also help you tell how do leaders find their stories, right? What is the methodology? There clearly has to be some way that leaders can find out what is or what kind of stories they should be telling. And last but not the least, we would like to share with you how our organization can help you. So let's dive in. I'll start with a quick introduction to my company. So, hi, I'm Rohan. As I mentioned, we are passionate business storytellers. So, we are a small team of people, and we essentially use design thinking principles in creating a culture of storytelling for the organizations that we work with. Now, for example, this could look like creating or enriching a new candidate experience through use of stories, or it could mean boosting the effectiveness of your sales team by strategic use of stories. Well, having said this, um, so I'm your host for this evening. My name is Rohan Poddar, and by training, I'm an engineer and MBA. I passed out from Sydenham College way back in 2007 in Mumbai, and I've been in various corporate sales and marketing roles. But at some point in my career, I thought my calling was more into the creative field, and that's when I decided to start my company. In 2016, I started the company as a production house, but today we are a brand business storytelling agency. I'm being joined by my co-host and my senior colleague Mandar. I'll let Mandar introduce himself. Over to you,
Hi,
Mandar.
thank you. Thank you, Rohan. And again, I extend a warm welcome to all our participants today. I see a lot of familiar names. I hope more join in. Just a quick introduction. Similar to Rohan, I come from an engineering background in computers. I and Rohan were actually classmates during our MBA days in marketing. Post my postgrad in MBA marketing, my main role in corporate world has been in market research. I was part of IMRB International's brand tracking research team in the quant division, mainly working with FMCGs, banking, IT companies. After 3-4 years of this, I started a training organization where we helped companies launch happiness and mindfulness initiatives within their teams. For the last 6-7 years, I've been with Rohan and his team working on various projects on employer branding and business storytelling from new joinees right up to leadership. And like Rohan mentioned, we are passionate business storytellers. And I really hope today's session adds few insights to your journey as a storyteller. Now, firstly, we would like to understand why are we here today, right? Why storytelling matters to leaders. There are three core areas that we would like to address today. First is uh, leaders need to inspire and influence people, right? But would you be inspired by someone whom you don't trust, right? So behind this influence and inspiration lies the core value of how can leaders generate trust in their team. That is why they need stories. Second, what we feel is leaders quite often communicate with their co-workers and their entire workforce on a lot of business issues, which are very dry. Revenue figures, market expansion, new product launches, launch of new verticals and business areas. But behind this entire communication, which human being is connecting to the workforce? The workforce needs to see the human face of a leader. That is where he can use stories. And last but not the least, a leader needs to create a culture in his organization which his workers follow, right? His workforce looks up to him to follow a certain set of behaviors. A culture at a macro level might seem very confusing to people unless and until a leader demonstrates this culture by a set of behaviors in his daily life. So these behaviors, when turned into stories, can help inspire his workforce. So these are the core areas where we feel leaders can integrate stories in their entire journey. Coming back to, like Rohan mentioned, a few examples which we think would be relevant. Looking at time, we'll only be sharing, probably two or three, some of our favorite examples. One example which we found, which we have often used in our webinars, looking at the diversity inclusion angle, is this lady who was the fourth woman of color to lead a CEO as a CEO of Fortune 500 company. And this is what she shared in a town hall. Now look at how powerful this message is. She has gone back to her childhood, and that is how she, probably revealed her vulnerable nature, what she has faced all of these years, right from her childhood to her growth as a corporate executive. So these are the kind of stories which can help inspire your workforce.
Right. We all have heard about Indra Nui, right? And this, I'm sure you must have heard of this particular instance where she was elected to the as a president of the board of PepsiCo, and she came home and she was about to share this, and her mother said, "That's all fine. Just go and get milk. We are out of milk." And what she was trying to do was she was trying to draw attention of her audience towards work-life balance, which means a little different things for women, especially in workforce. So she was throwing light on a matter that is sensitive to a lot of women out there. Satya Nadella, right? Everybody knows him. And so Satya Nadella wanted to change the internal culture of Microsoft from know it all to learn it all. So there were a lot of people in Microsoft who felt that they know they are at the top of the things, they know everything. And here he shared a very beautiful story of his father who used to write down everything that he heard new, learned new in a diary, which would really help him to really grow as an individual. And this is the story, a personal story that Satya Nadella shared.
Uh, Now coming back to a few key areas where leaders, like we mentioned, can integrate storytelling. One of the key areas is how can they inspire their workforce with a unified vision and a purpose. For example, we would like to share with you a business practice that's followed by Amazon. What Amazon does internally is even before they launch a product, they come up with a press briefing. How will they introduce this product to their future customers? Now, that is how this entire narrative is developed. Let's take a small example. Let's take an example of quick commerce companies like, let's say, Zepto or Swiggy, Instamart. We were working with one of their teams during their launch, and one quick story which we developed with them was, let's say a housewife who gets up at 6 a.m. and she realizes she's out of milk. There's no shop open, right? Now, that is a narrative which they can use when their actual service is launched. But if you start looking at that vision, that narrative, then the product and the service, it falls into place. That is how their narrative and stories relate to their real life customers. The second area where we think, probably leaders can use storytelling is, yeah, Ron, if you can just jump. Yeah, great. So, like we mentioned earlier, building trust. Now, trust is something which is very integral to why you will follow your leader, right? And one of the crux of this entire process of building trust is what we call as the values to behavior model, which we quite often use in a lot of clients in our consulting assignments. What this means in simple words is every organization has a set of values, probably 4 or 5 key words which you can find in a fancy glass when you enter the corporate office. But can the person working at the lowest level, someone who's working on the field, can he identify with those words? It's very difficult. Now, for him to identify, these values need to broken up into some daily behaviors, which, whether it is your internal stakeholders or your external stakeholders, what can they see when they interact with you and your staff? That is what is trust, which is built, probably it takes a long time. It takes many years for companies to build this trust, but these are the stories which leaders can narrate to their workforce. And last but not the least, uh, change, there are upheavals happening in the business world, mergers and acquisitions, layoffs, a lot of good and bad things happening. But if the leaders are able to create a story, let's take an example of an assignment that we did where, probably during the lockdown, about 16 to 18% of the workforce of an organization was going to be laid off. Now, if the story comes to the rest of the 80% as a layoff, it seems like a scary scenario. But if the leaders were able to tell them that you 80% can stay because of certain business reasons that we need to sacrifice these 16%, we will help them get a better career opportunity. We will be there hand holding them, counseling them until and unless they are able to support their families. And it is critical for our entire business to stay alive. These are the kind of stories which leaders need to convey to their workforce to make sure that no rumors spread. Let's take example of mergers and acquisitions. When a cultural shift happens, a lot of people from the original company which has been taken over suffer this mindset that now our entire life is going to change, work life balance is going to go haywire. That is the time when a calming influence from a leader's story, something that he has done in his daily life, something on how he has integrated his change, can be an amazing example to allay their fears.
Right. Now that we've seen the three major areas where stories can be told by leaders, the question that might be coming to your mind is that's all good, but how does a leader find these stories? Where does he go looking for these stories? What's the way to really create these stories? So we want to address that as quickly as we can in this section. So every story needs to start with something what we call as empathy, right? You need to empathize with who your audience is. You need to know what is. So that means asking a question: who is my audience, and what do they really, really care about? So your audience could be, yes, of course, your entire organization, but it's again situation specific. If you're laying off, say, 100 employees, as Mandar mentioned in one of his examples, then maybe your audience are the people who are nearest to them or who are affected by these layoffs, or maybe even the people who are being laid off as well. So you need to really carefully define who your audience is, as against saying that it's just anybody who wants to listen to my message. That probably would not be a good starting point. So it's really important to know who your audience is and what they really care about. Do they really care? Are they suffering from anxiety because they think they are going to be on the line next to be laid off? Or if you're launching a new product, then what are the emotions? Are people really curious to know what happens and what's the way ahead, etc., etc.? So you really need to understand the anchor emotions of your audience. This leads us to something called discover. Now that you've understood what's the mental makeup of your audience, you need to understand what kind of themes will really cut ice with your audience. What kind of themes are sensible to them? What kind of themes are relevant to them in the current times, right? And that is something that you would have to really think about now that you know your audience. This will then lead you to help you ideate. So what will you ideate? You will basically ideate. Now that you know, if the theme is that you are adopting a set of new cultural values, and let's say transparency is one of those cultural values, what kind of narrative can you develop around transparency? So we use a tool called how might we statement, or HMW, where we basically break down the whole problem the way we understand it into a simple articulate sentence called how might we tell a story so that we are able to achieve XYZ outcome for our ABC target audience for the purpose of so and so. So when you write anything in such a simple format, you are able to then bring in a lot of simplicity to otherwise very complex or a nuanced problem. Now, from there, your mind starts thinking in divergent ways where you then come up, okay, if this is the problem statement, maybe I can create a story where I can talk about a certain individual who just got promoted and how he contributed to the organization, or a certain individual where company helped him during a financial crisis, etc., etc. Those kinds of things start coming into your mind once you write down and articulate this. This will then lead you to crafting. You need to craft the story now. Now that you have an overall story. So, for example, somebody who must have thought of Sholi, must have thought, let's create a story about two friends who are fugitives from law, but they help a Thakur in some village to fight crime or to exact avenge or revenge. Sorry. But then they need to do the characterization, cast the character. So that's what essentially what the leader needs to do. So he needs to answer this question: who is going to be the character in my story? What conflict does that character go through, and how should the story end? Now it may all be that the character may be the leader himself, especially when he's sharing his personal story or his story of failure or his story of growth, etc. So this essentially helps him understand. He could, let's say, think of some individual or some employee that he wants to share his story, right? It could be an employee who coped up with, say, adversity some time back, and he would want to share his story with the organization. So essentially, that's what you answer in the craft point. And finally, you need to narrate this. So you need to know where you're going to narrate it. It's, of course, where you are going to narrate it depends on who your audience is. Is it external audience, internal audience? In internal audience is the whole swath of employees or a certain section of employees or employees in a certain department or a certain seniority, etc. Now, let me tell you how can leaders, answer this question. So, first, of course, if you're a leader, you would want to speak to your HR business partner, maybe your LNOD team. Your direct reportees are a very good source of understanding what kind of story should we be making, or understanding what's going on with our workforce. Customer facing teams can really help you. Customer facing teams like sales, marketing, customer service executives, etc., can help you come up with themes when it relates to external audience, for example. Employee surveys, these are very powerful tools to gauge the mood of your employees. It could be through your usual mechanism of employee engagement surveys or some other surveys that you conduct. LinkedIn, Glassdoor, very good sources to really know what's happening, especially Glassdoor, because in Glassdoor, people, because of anonymity, really write what they want or they feel like about an organization. And maybe if a leader goes there and he studies and goes through some of the comments, maybe he understands a few things which can really help him know what more about what kind of theme should be attractive. Of course, industry trends, so there are all reports that come in about work-life balance, future of work, diversity and inclusion, etc., etc. And then the leader would want to introduce these topics or talk about his position or the organization's position about these particular subjects, but in a way which is anecdotal, which in a way which engages. So these are some of the sources where he could answer the first two questions, which empathize and discover. As for the rest, now that he knows what kind of themes he wants to make story on, he or she wants to make story on, he now needs to get or step into the craft of actually making a story. Now this is where a leader's internal communication team, maybe his employer branding team, marketing team, can help him come up and craft these stories. Now that we've done this, we need to now push the stories on the touch points that we think are the most relevant. So what are the common touch points where leaders can really tell these stories? So first is, of course, your internal newsletter. A lot of organizations send out these newsletters to update their employees in different departments of what's happening. That's a good source. Your LinkedIn page, yes, of course. Company blog, or maybe a blog run by the leader himself or herself. That could be a good source of it. But these are digital mediums. Why not physical? We can even, and in fact, the best way of storytelling that, as we have known from ancient times, is one to one or maybe one to many in a physical format. So, team meetings, it could be just your team or extended team. Town halls are very good ways to tell stories rather than talking about business language or speaking in business language or speaking about stats and figures. Conferences and summits, especially for the external audience. So, this in one snapshot gives you how a leader can go about identifying a story, creating a story, and then telling that story to his audience. Now that we've talked about story, a discussion on storytelling cannot be complete without knowing how a story is effective. Because if a leader is going to put his time or express himself there has to be a way to know whether he has been effective in what he's done, right? So there are two ways, broadly two ways. Of course, you can dig and find out many more ways, but two ways broadly that can really help. So first, of course, is if you're putting out your stories in a digital medium, which is LinkedIn or company blog or newsletter or emails, etc., is the engagement metrics, which are really tactical level metrics in terms of likes, comments, what are people really saying about the issue, what are they suggesting, etc. The second one is call to action tracking. Now, every story we believe that a leader makes should have some kind of call to action. That means after the audience has heard or read or listened to your story, they should do something. So, for example, after the leader has shared his personal story, maybe he wants his teammates to open up about their views on a certain topic or share their experiences. And if enough number of people are doing or sharing those their views or experiences, that means their story has been generally effective. It could be that he wants people to sign up for a certain company-wide initiative or a project-wide or a team initiative. It could be that he wants people to work on or complete a certain specific project or a task, right? So that call to action, of course, depends on the context, the story, the messaging. But suffice to say that a story which has a strong call to action is also open to being tracked effectively. So that's what we mean by tracking effectiveness.
Great. And coming back to how we can associate with organizations in what capacity, like Rohan mentioned earlier, we lead a lot of learning-based interventions where we partner with the learning development teams to understand their organization's learning requirements. These are few of the formats which we typically engage in. Specifically for today's discussion, what's getting highlighted is the storytelling lead camp that we have with organizations where the typical participants are either head of departments, CXOs, minus one, minus two, and future leaders as per their succession planning. Some other formats which are cross-functionally used are a storytelling dive camp, and the storytelling idea camp is what we specifically use with the brand teams. Probably teams which are taking care of huge budgets for a new product launch or something which very creative needs to be taken care of. So these are the typical formats. Again, these can be customized as per our discussions with the LNOD teams. Now, great time for some questions. We received some fantastic questions from the 83, 84 odd registrations that we had. One of the most important questions which I thought we need to address was asked by someone from Exitel's HR team, the HR head, Bhavishya Dabral. I think, yeah, you're there. Great. Thanks for joining in. So the question that you had asked was, can leaders be trained in the art of storytelling? And again, I hope our session has already addressed this. Yes, they can definitely be trained on this. Rohan also elaborated on the 5 steps which need to be integrated to do this. Further, what you asked was very interesting that a lot of leaders have covered beautiful journeys. They are unable to share and inspire these, their team members with these stories. So I hope again this was answered on how the leaders can integrate these stories, what kind of broad themes can be taken up, also what are the methods and what are the platforms where these stories can be shared. So I hope we have answered this. The next question that you asked was, how can you build storytelling sessions in the training calendar? Now again, we would be very happy to build this into every quarter, into every month. That's how we typically work with organizations. Our storytelling interventions run at least for 1 or 2 quarters to be really impactful. The second question that we received, again, which was very interesting, was okay, it is Sneha Singh from Nurture Farm. And her question was, what is the true measure of a good leader? Thanks, Neha, for asking this question. Personally, I feel a good leader is someone who exhibits servant leadership. I read this about 8 or 10 years ago when I started my training interventions, and I have been in love with this concept ever since. Simply put, a leader who gives priority to enabling his teams more than looking at a dream of how the organization is going to progress. Because if he builds concrete teams, high performing teams, that at the end of the day will help his organization grow. So a servant leader would always be empathetic, looking at his team's needs, sharing stories, coaching them, guiding them. Secondly, I think a measure of a true leader would be someone whom people trust, like we discussed earlier. I, as an employee, will only follow someone and imbibe someone's message if I truly trust him. So, simply put, I think these three parameters are something which a true leader should really stand for. Thanks for asking this question. I guess we have a couple of other questions which Rohan can take up.
Sure, thanks, Mandar. So we have a question from Vivek Pandey at mayur.biz, and he has asked a really good question. He asks, how can organizations create a culture of continuous learning and development for their employees? Number one, and what strategies can organizations employ to overcome resistance to change while implementing new LNOD? A great question. So, Vivek, my simple answer would be, why does anybody do anything when he's intrinsically motivated to do something, or he feels, or he or she feels that there is a value for that person in doing something. So, if you go by these first principles, your learning will only be valuable to your employee if it really means something, right? If it really affects him in a way that can improve or grow him or improve his journey or improve him as his skills. Secondly, there's something called social proof. So, if, for example, when we see other people doing certain things, we are tempted to do that and follow those things, right? So based on this, I would say the way to really create a culture of continuous learning is essentially to create, and where storytelling, after there are many other things, but where storytelling can contribute is to really continuously create stories of people who have used their learning in practical situations. So told in first person, told by these people themselves that, like for example, if it's a marketing manager and the company is launching a new product and he just suddenly realizes that he's awfully short of digital marketing skills, and that's when he learns digital marketing skills from the organization, and that really helps him. That is a wonderful story to tell to other people, right? So those are the stories that you need to continuously create. There are other ways, of course, that you need to be consistent with your messaging. You need to, if you have some role models, really that works really well with a lot of people. We really are, we look up to a role model. So there are sure, you can come up with role models within your organization. Your leaders can play a multiplier effect by leading by example. If the leaders can themselves show that because of something I learned, I was able to take a better decision, right? That is something that could be useful. So of course, it's a whole lot of science and art into this, but that's the only best I can answer in the given time that we have. The second question that I would like to address is from Ritika Sharma. She is from internal communications from Excitel, and she asked, what communication strategy should a young startup follow that has a lot of field employees? Great question again. So when you have a lot of field employees, I'm inevitably I'm led to think that you have a lot of stories. You need to figure out a mechanism where the field employees can then take these stories and convey to you. So there has to be like a complete communication channel between you and the field employees in terms of knowing what stories that can come from the field that are the stories of impact that your probably product or service is enabling on the ground level. It could be the personal experiences of your field employees working in the field and how that really helps them in personal growth, professional growth, and how your organization is really changing the industry. So those kinds of things, right? So I would suggest that it's important to firstly establish a mechanism where your field employees can regularly communicate stories to you, at least themes to you, and you can then decide, the central team can decide if those themes are worth making a story on, right? But this channel has to be established. This invariably will lead to a culture of storytelling, right? Where everybody then, they're not only doing their job, but they're also keeping an eye on the kind of stories that they can create for the organization. So that's a very quick answer that I give. Let me see if I have some questions. I have a question from Sandeep and from Ayurhythm, and he says, "Are there common mistakes or misconceptions leader make when it comes to storytelling? How can they avoid them?" Amazing question. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is a lot of leaders would think that storytelling is just uh, that instant of creativity, that flash of creativity that comes to you. It's like the eureka moment. But frankly, and I have said this in my beginning introduction, that we believe storytelling is both a science and an art. The art is, of course, the creative part of it, but the science is how do you know what themes are relevant to be made stories on, right? So I think the biggest misconception is that it's just a flash of creativity, and No, there is a method to it, and that's where design thinking really helps in creating stories that are sensitive towards the audience. That would be my question. Of course, this is a deep topic, but that's something that I can take answer right now. Uh, sure, thank you, Randana Rao. Feel free to leave the call at any time. So, thank you, folks. And this is the time we have for question and answers. I know we could have discussed more, but we have to keep an eye on time. Um, we will be sending you out this presentation, not presentation, sorry, the video recording. If of course, if you want a presentation, then we would request you to share your feedback about this session, feedback on us, how we can improve this, and that will really help us. And in return for that, we'll share with you the entire presentation that we just showed you. For any other queries, you can write to storytelling@rohanpoddar.com. And thank you so much for making time on this Friday evening. And we will see you in some other webcast on some other topic on some other Friday. So thank you, folks. Have a great weekend. And I'm signing off from our end. Thank you so much. See you.
Thank you everyone for joining in.